Okie dokie, we're about ready to start here. I saw folks are building up. Welcome, Kristen, Alex, Lotka, Hannah. Glad to see you here. And we'll go ahead and we'll get a little bit. Levi, glad to see you here. We're a little bit early. Let's see who else we've got. Quentin, if you would please also make certain that your microphone is muted unless you have a question for me. If you want to, you certainly are welcome to send me a chat message. Here's how it works. If you do the chat message, the chat or your question or your conversation is invisible to everybody but me and to you. Now, typically, if it's a question that I think that I can share with everybody, I will. If it's something else, I'll say, hey, send me an email. Okay, so we'll get started here. We've got Kristen, Michael, and Levi, and Quentin. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get started because we are a little bit early, but that's okay. Now, this week, just to keep us on track, you've got a couple of assignments due, and then you have a couple of exams, the management decision problem, and then the interactive session. Now, I want to take some time today to talk about Chapter 6, and you have an exam over it. And before I do that, I want to make sure that everybody avails themselves of the web safari, these TED guest speakers, these additional resources. And the reason being, hi, Olivia. And the reason being that very simply, this chapter ties together a lot of the courses, or will give you some sense of an overview of what we've done in some of the prior courses in the BISS series, the Business Information Systems and Strategies series. And those courses obviously include 1103, which is the beginning computer course, which is of some value, I think, in the sense of just learning about the productivity suites, learning some about the machines. I think that's good for you. But the real value added of the courses really start to happen with the experiences that you have in business problem analysis and in data administration. In business problem analysis, we focus a lot of time and attention on how do I take a common, ordinary business problem, and how do I do that, okay? And then how do I compute it or build a mathematical model or a pro forma, and then run the numbers, look at the possible outcomes, and then visualize the data. In the data admin course, we show you how, we show you from the ground up how we build a data warehouse and data marts, and how we take the information that we collect as a company and put it into a format where it's retrievable and where we can make some sense of it. We can run some queries. Now, that's the second layer. And really the third is in this course, and really in this chapter. This is in my mind the most important chapter, because it talks about business intelligence, and it talks about databases and their role in information management. I can tell you for a fact that when you leave here, you will have the essential skills for an entry-level business analyst, okay? And that's based on skills that you do in the courses, and skills that the people out in the practice, that is company owners, corporations, et cetera, tell us that they want someone to be able to do, or to understand, or to easily step into it. The final piece of this is the dashboard. And you're going to hear a lot of comments about that. For example, if you've taken the data admin course, we saw that we used Northwind Traders, and we developed, and we saw a dashboard. Click a link and it runs this report. Click a link and it tells us the inventory. And that's back to that thing that information technology ultimately has to be decision-centric. It has to provide you data, in other words, information that you can use for decision-making. Now, business intelligence software and applications, as I talked about the other day, all right, are intended to focus you on those daily things for which you need to be focused. And it will typically be some piece of operation or maybe some type of metrics. Who knows? It's going to depend a lot on your industry. On the other hand, business intelligence applications also provide us a way to look out at the world, scan, and see what's out there. If we wanted to use a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and then that we can, and threats, we could design it to do that. If we're a company that's more like using that Porter's and his concept or paradigm of the relative bargaining power of suppliers, how easily can people substitute goods, any new market entrants, its regulations, etc. Now, dashboards often, for ones that are sold to people, try to do some of both, but a lot of it will be focused upon operations kinds of things that you're gonna have to deal with, and that's why this is just such an important chapter. When we talk about business intelligence, it has its roots in some earlier tools, things like an executive support system or a decision support system, and those were tools that were designed really for people at the highest level of management to make some sense of complicated data and information. Well, things have changed since that period of time because companies have gotten flatter. The organization hierarchy has been hollowed out. The middle management people that were there, they're gone. And so when people go to work today, particularly if you go to work for a large company, you won't have near the reporting distance that is between you and, say, the CEO that you would have 25 or 30 years ago. And I always like to tell people, and this is a good time to talk about, here's a dashboard that you'll find interesting, and I'm not going to name the company. But when I was in my doctoral program, my advisor said, here's a firm, and it was an oil company. He said, they need some things, some help, some things done, and I want you to take the case and take a couple of colleagues. Okay, so we did this. As we started doing our initial phase of figuring out what that client really wanted based upon their felt need and what they said and all that, then we came to a point where we started to do some explorations. And I was sent to see a gentleman who had a very unique job. He had a bullpen of about 25 or 30 people. They had phones. You got to remember, this is before an internet and all of that. So people use the phone, they made a call. And around the walls of that bullpen, it was like a call center, were nothing but organizational charts. And when there was a change, he'd note the change and he'd post it there. So they had 30 plus employees doing nothing but keeping track of who's in the chain of command. And I can understand at one part that it was a large company, had a lot of employees, and so you want to make sure reporting channels are good. On the other hand, I thought, is this really the scope of this necessary? But they were really a dashboard, and that's what they were intended to do. Well, as chapter 16 tells us, those tools have developed and they have developed to a point where they are pretty sophisticated, and they rely heavily upon database technology. And that's why we give you the data admin course, not to turn you into people who can write SQL, although you'll learn a little bit, but so that you'll see a SAP. Again, it's the analogy I use in all of these courses. We're going to teach you how to ride a bike, or we're going to teach you how to drive a car. Okay? A business intelligence system or application is only as good as the data that gets fed into it, and only as good as the human beings who decide on what it is we're going to put in the dashboard. Okay? And if you think about your vehicle, okay? If you have a car, think about what you have a dashboard. How fast am I going? How much gas have I got? You may have red light indicators that there's something wrong with the engine. If you have a newer model, you may have things like how much air is in the tires, and they'll give you even the newer ones and high-end vehicles will give you a little bump on the rear if you veer to the left or the right. If you take your hands off the steering wheel, it'll give you a vocal command, put your hands on, or it'll give you a bunch of dings so there's an emergency. And you have an infotainment system. You can do all kinds of settings, and those dashboards are about vehicle performance, and also about the environment. Some of those vehicles have a little thing that pops up and it looks like a speeding sign, not a speeding sign, but a speed limit sign. Excuse me. And it will, if you're going over the limit, you'll get a little red dot or something that will tell you, hey, you're going over the speed limit. Well, all of that being said, the authors do a pretty decent job here in terms of walking us through what a database is meant to do. And really the first question up there, here in these learning objectives, what are the problems of managing data resources in a traditional file environment? They are really twofold. One of them is the traditional file, the data that we have out there is becoming increasingly what we call unstructured. It doesn't fit. And it doesn't come to us in the form of data in some kind of table. It's out there in all kinds of formats and situations, running the gamut from tweets to followers, to a network, to Yelp, Pinterest, comments about a product, recommendations, all of this stuff. And on top of all of that kind of qualitative unstructured data is all of the data that companies are getting from sensors that are embedded in the products they sell. And this is just, people are really struggling with coming to grips with all this because they're just overwhelmed. Those who learn how to take this stuff, mine it, extract it, and use it, it's gold. And I can't emphasize that enough. Now, there in the chapter, there's these objectives, the second objective and the third and the fourth. And really, let me jump to that last question. Why are information policy, data administration, data quality assurance essential for managing the firm's data resources? If you don't have an information policy, you're lost as a goose in a rainstorm. And information policy says, here's the data we collect. Here's who owns the data, okay? Here's how we process the data. Here's how we use the data. And the best example I can give you, and I've mentioned this in the last class, probably this as well, if you go Oracle and use Oracle's products, they have about a 250-page manual that tells you how to use the Oracle retailer package that includes dashboard data. Okay, so it's the vendors out there understand this as they sell this, and the companies who you buy these products and use them, and you'll be out there with those folks, have to have a firm grip on that. And they have to also have a firm grip in terms of data admin, and that is, do we use vendors? Do we use vendors? Do we do it in-house? How do we handle that? And a key piece of that, obviously, is security. Then we come to the question of data quality assurance. How old are the data? How did we collect them? Who processed them? How have we handled them? Now, you say, you almost sound like you're talking about how we'd handle money. Exactly, because information costs money. And you'll hear me say this over and over. The typical firm we should be spending somewhere between 6 to 8% of its gross income on information and information systems, data. And most of them spend less, but then when you get to a knowledge-based firm, a pharmacy, a university, an engineering firm, those types of, a law firm, okay, the amount of money you should invest in information, in data, is about 10 to 12% of your gross sales. That's a tremendous investment. And it goes even up, it can reach far higher if you're working, say, in a high-end manufacturing or distribution or assembly situation. All right? So as we look at these, this chapter helps tie together, I hope, a lot of loose ends for you in terms of, well, why did we learn this? Why did we do this? Or why did we do that? And now, the course in my mind that really takes us, okay, from this stage of understanding to, how do I take my constraints, my objectives, the resources I have, and how do I put them together to get the best result possible given my constraints? And that's the management science course. And as I've said before, in Excel, the two most powerful tools are Solver, okay, and the pivot table. And they both allow us to visualize data, to see data, and to crunch numbers, and to come up with, certainly Solver does, the optimization engine in Excel. But let's just say, okay, I want to minimize costs, or I want to maximize profit, or I have a target value I want to achieve. And so you say, okay, what are the constraints? And what are the variables that we want to change? And that course is exceptionally valuable for a simple reason. It allows you, if you want to build a mathematical model of your operation, a mathematical model of some operations or internal things you do in your company, or and you can do it. You can use it for pricing your value proposition to your customer. So that course, I wish everybody took it. I don't think everybody does, and it's a shame, because that piece of understanding, it's a way of thinking more than using a particular piece of software. Well, hopefully this chapter that talks about dashboards and the business intelligence and information management is going to be useful, and I think it will tie together a lot of loose ends. Now, and they give us a little case study here as far as it helping out with the Postal Service. Here you're going to see this very this very typical, well, this template that's been at the start of every single chapter in the book, and it's really is a template because it shows what I would call a virtuous cycle. Okay, where we start with these three fundamental elements of information systems. All right. And how they feed into some type of business problem or business case, and then what we do to the outcomes that we get, and then we feed that back to address some business challenges. Now, the particulars there, are going to change with the situation. But this is that virtuous cycle that walks us through this process where we make certain that our information systems are decision centric. Okay, they're designed to help us make decisions. Now, as we move on through here, we're going to see again some of what they talk about, the file organization. And these are standard databases, okay? And if you've had 4403, you can see here are the tables, and then we have the files that create the records and the fields, etc. The problem is that not everything fits that model. And the other problem is this. You have these silos, okay? So one of the great challenges we have in trying to build good business intelligence, i.e. dashboard applications, is trying to de-silo all of these different data systems. And these are typically they have grown up with layer after layer after layer of applications, programming languages, applications, etc. It's about every 2 years that we will get a phone call at the school, and someone will say, do we have anybody here who can do COBOL programming? And COBOL is about as old, it's a relic. However, many legacy systems are run on COBOL, and they've kept them there because people didn't want to have to redo the system. And COBOL is a pretty simple but fairly powerful. It's common ordinary business operations language. That's what it means. And we'll get that call, and so we have to try and hunt down a student that might have taken COBOL. Or is there anybody here who knows COBOL? And you'd be surprised at the people that call us and ask us about that when they're trying to take what we call a legacy system and couple it into a newer system. So you can see these kinds of these silos, and this is really the traditional approaches the authors talk about. And this becomes problematic in terms of trying to pull them together. And the authors talk about two factors here: data redundancy and data inconsistency. Let me give you an example of a problem of a client I work with in terms of data redundancy, and I'm not going to tell you who they are. But they're a membership organization, okay? And so they have terrible problems with data redundancy. Why? Well, if mom and dad and junior and sister, sissy, etc., the family join, each of them sharing the same address, you now have a nightmare of data redundancy. Because each of those people is a unique record. And so we spend the money and the time to input and to store 5 people who live at the same address. And that's a challenge. It's a big challenge. Or someone who is a student in one class and is an instructor or teacher in another. That's data redundancy. And that's also an inconsistency. And so when you gather all that kind of data, especially if it involves people, you run into those problems, and it costs money to store those. As the authors start to walk us through the capabilities of DBMS, and this is a database management system, okay? And what makes a relational database so powerful? Let me focus you on the DBMS. As the authors tell you, a DBMS is exactly what it says. It's databases that are managed as a system. Now, you'll hear about data warehouses, okay, and data marts, and these are places where we store the stuff, i.e. the information that we then use and manage. And so, and if you've taken the data administration course with me, and when I clicked on relationship tools and you saw how all those tables were related one way or the other, it looked like a bunch of spaghetti. That's the data. That's a picture that's representative of how databases get tied together. Okay? And so that allows us to collect a lot of information. Now, the relational database goes beyond that. How it goes beyond that is we take and we make certain that inside it, every record is unique, all right, to the extent possible. And because we have unique records, we can link a table to another table to another table. We can link as many tables as we want. And those, if anybody here right now is taking 4403 with me, what you're going to find is that we're going to get to the point where we'll be taking tables and recreating them, and then combining them with other tables that have been recreated. We're going to a whole lot of that. That's when we can really harness the potential of the data that we collect, that we have, and really get some insights from it, and be able then to make some decisions about our business, or maybe our external posture, like say our pricing, or how we roll, or how we try to address regulatory issues. So that's the main thing, and that takes us away from the traditional file. Now, this is just for your consumption, but one of the things also is this. In the old database management systems, when we had a table, we literally stored the table in a physical part of the hard drive, and we ran a query. The query would have pointers that would point to those addresses so we could get the data. And then if we executed the query, we had yet another object that we were storing, the query with all of the results. Today, with relational data, we can run a query, get a thing called a view, and we save the code that we use to get the view, but we don't save the view. That makes us this enables us to compute stuff far faster than we ever could, and to tailor those queries in ways that we can take and harvest that we never thought we could do before. So the relational database is a very, very, very powerful tool that we have that lets us relate tables to each other. And really what we're talking about is relating the who, what, when, where of a database with another. And I think in the data admin course, I talk about the design of information. We talk about the wisdom triangle, and that feeds itself into what we're looking at here. Now here they show us, for example, a human resources database. and they show you the relational tables. And note that we have a key or a primary key. That primary key is what enables us to create unique records. Now let me stop for a moment, and I want to say this. The authors of this textbook, this is the best textbook that's out there on information system, on MIS, bar none. I do have to say that I think where the authors maybe are not as on top of things as they ought to be is the process whereby I take this stuff that I've stored, I extract it, say via queries. Now I've got to analyze it, and I want to visualize it. I want to put it into a table or a figure or a graph, something like that. And I'm not sure that they do enough of it or talk about that as much as we should. The great challenge for us is to know when we ought to take a table and dump it into an analytic engine, into a computational engine, say like an Excel or an SPSS, or any of those tools that are out there that can let us crunch numbers and then take those numbers and put them into a table or put them into a chart or into a bar graph so that we can visualize them and we can see. Because people, when they look at things, they tend to look for patterns. And we are too. So that's the great challenge that we have here. All right. And you can see as we see that part that comes from that general table. And you'll also note this concept of foreign keys. And a foreign key is a primary key from another table that's been placed into that foreign table. Okay? And think of it like, it's an ambassador to that other table. So we can use primary keys, and we can use what we call foreign keys to do even more work and even further refining what we get. So that when I look at my dashboard and I look at today's sales records, I know I've got good data. I know I'm looking at reality. I'm looking at something that's accurate. And so I can make some decisions on the basis of that. Now, they give you some information about the capabilities of DMSs, their operations, and they give you kind of a little mini case study there, if you will. And then over here on this, here they show you, the authors have got this in the book, and probably I'd flip it around, but you've got the text, but they're basically showing us how these operate, how we relate one table to the next. And that's something that you've seen before. Shouldn't be a surprise. Now, if you're taking data, if you're taking 4403 with me now, or you've taken it before, data admin, we talked about data dictionaries. And the textbook that I use provides you students an outstanding overview of how Oracle works in terms of its data dictionary. And it remains somewhat code-oriented. Notice you have to write code to define things. Access is more like what you'd see if you use an Oracle or SAS, where you have really like a SAS or a SAP or some of the other tools out there, say Crystal Reports, that have more of an iconic environment. And what we mean is pictures, okay? And here in this data dictionary, we take our field name, which is also a dimension or a character or attribute, and we determine what type of data is it, and then we put a description in there. Then if we want to, we come down to the database properties and we put some constraints, we add some constraints on there. And then, as we've done basically back in 1123, you can click you can click on that lookup, and you can faintly see it. And you can, if you want to, with the lookup, you can run a query on another table, okay, that will let you populate this field. In other words, you can create a drop-down menu. And we talked about forms and how we input data. So the data dictionary is exceptionally important because we define particular dimensions, and then we say what type of data it's going to be, and that has storage costs and computational implications. All right. See, so well, okay, and this, when we have that all put together, and then they also talk about normalizing data, and we cover that some in 4403. Although what's happening is that we have so much unstructured data that normalizing it is going to be pretty tough to do. And normalized databases, normalized databases, or normalized tables just simply make everything easier to find, get rid of inconsistencies, get rid of redundancies. All right, and there are some different forms, and in form 1, 2, 3, I think it's COD is the person who's the progenitor of all this, to make sure. And here's the easiest way to think about it. A paragraph, as you know, has a thesis sentence or a summary sentence. It has a thesis sentence supported by points, or it has a concluding sentence supported by points prior to the summary. So one of them is more of deductive. I start with an idea, I announce it, and I show you the proof, or inductive, where I walk you through some things that have proofs, and I say, okay, here's the thesis. And a good table is like a good paragraph. It sticks to the main thought, and that's what makes it powerful. Well, you can read all that stuff faster than I can talk through, but you can see the entity relationships. Again, we've covered this so you understand that, and we understand that in some situations we have a one-to-many relationship, okay? And sometimes we have a one-to-one, and sometimes we have a many-to-many, and it just depends. If you take a look here for a moment, we look at a supplier and a part. Let's say I'm Pep Boys, or I'm AutoZone, and I have carburetor, some part of a carburetor, or I have brake pads. Let's say brake pads. All right. If they're a standard item, I don't care if they're made. If I look in the box and it says this can be used in blah blah blah, all these cars, I'm good. If it doesn't say that, then I got to go back and find out, well, is there a specialized part that I need? Okay. And so when we look at that kind of situation, we're talking about multiple suppliers producing the same part or type of part. Now, the authors also take us into the question of the cloud. Now, all of you, when you go into the lab at OBU, and if you have to, you log into the computer, and then you click on the top left screen, the VMware, and you click on it, and you go through a couple of passwords or whatever it is, and then now you have access, Word, Excel, etc. You're operating in the cloud. Now, why would they do that? Well, it's pretty simple. It's easier to have that program. It's easier to have Office 360 out in the cloud than it is to download it, put it into a disk, and walk around the lab and run that disk 300 times or 200 times. An enormous waste of personnel. So the cloud's developed to provide us the ability to compute from a ubiquitous standpoint. And you can, if you can get into the VMware if you're computing remote. The problem is to log in, you have to have one of the lab seats. So there's some work that they still need to do with that. Now, they've got some other examples here for you as they talk about some of these databases. Here's one that here's one you'll hear about, and one that you may have to learn and to use, and it's Hadoop, okay? And these types, as the authors say, these types of applications, okay, are not really too good, okay, at using data, what we call big data, that are and structured data that don't fit the usual table types of situation. And they walk you through the Hadoop file systems and all this business, and it's there for you to see. Then we talk about analytic platforms, okay, which are things like a data set, Oracle, IBM's Pure System, etc. Then we get to this issue of online analytical processing. What that basically says is, when you go search for Google, you and I don't know how many other hundreds of millions of people in the world are searching Google. Now, there's a fraction of you searching for the same thing, but that online, that live interactive processing takes all of this to a whole different level. And the reason is this: when the first OLAPs were designed, okay, primarily by the two gentlemen who founded Google, really figured out how to make it an iterative process, so that when you searched and you selected something, they utilized that information to build an algorithm. And so that's why, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go out here, and here's Google search, and I'm going to put, and I put in OKLA, and suddenly I get Oklahoma, Oklahoma Board of Nursing, Oklahoma State Department of Education, Oklahoma State Fair, Oklahoma City. Now, why did these pop up? Because they fit some kind of profile from the IP of my machine, okay? That's why. And or these tend to be right now the top searches, the trending searches based on the analytics there. And it's also Google sells advertising, and this is linked into their AdSense programs. Search engine optimization is a course I wish we could offer for you. I wish we had, if I could take 2 years off, or let's say Dr. Green could take 2 years off, or probably both of us, and just learn it. We could come back and offer a course in it and blow your mind. Because search engine optimization, if you have a web presence and you're selling on the web, or you're trying to get clients on the web, you've got to understand it, and it's pretty complex. It's a pretty complex tool. Well, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close that off, and we'll go back over here to VitalSource. But again, I didn't want to be too didactic with this, but I want to make sure that you saw this chapter really draws or culminates in a lot of what we've done in prior courses. Now, the authors talk about, and they give you some of these things like data mining, okay? And data miners are looking for hidden patterns, or we're looking for anomalous record sets, that type of thing. And you could see, now, one of the things I've been involved with most heavily is text mining. In fact, way back in 1982, my dissertation was how to dealt with creating an algorithm to capture text in written documents and make and get a sense of the importance of that. And I analyzed hundreds of sets of documents, and I had I had an algorithm that I built, and so we tested it to see what concept seemed to be the most important in that document. And this is on the basis not only just simply the count, the number of times it appeared, but also on what we would call a semantic analysis. It's been a long time. Okay, the last thing I did was back in the early 2000s. I did a study of I did a study of tech firms versus ground-based firms, and I compared them on the basis of their use of terminology that related to information resources to see how that was playing itself out. And I used a theoretical paradigm or conceptual paradigm that talked about different types of information resources, and those were subparts of tacit versus explicit. So it was about knowledge management. But to make a long story short, excuse me, what I found was really startling, that these so-called ground-based, these are firms that were doing that were putting forth a prospectus for a stock offering. Okay, so they were going to be publicly traded. The documents all had to be in the same format. The content was what differed, and it was fascinating to see how similar those two types of firms were. I was shocked. I thought it would be a lot different. And in terms of human resources, there was incredible emphasis put in both of those perspectives. In each company's prospectus, a lot of talk about employee experience and employee training. And it really brought home to me that they understood that the information and the data and technology are important, but you got to have people who are comfortable with it and who will work with it and do something with it and do something effective. So that's my little story there. And I really didn't find any big differences between those two types of firms. Well, there's some more here as far as they talk about policy and data admin, data governance, a lot of vocabulary. Okay? But in the end, what we're trying to do is to collect data, put it in a place where we can store it and extract it. And then once we've extracted that data, analyze it and visualize it so we can use it to make a decision. If you've taken 4403 with me, this will sound very familiar. When we do these queries or we use these dashboards, we really have to make sure that we first of all run what one would call the periodic or regular queries. What were our sales for the week? But now and then, you also want to use what I would call the serendipitous type of query, kind of a why this or what if this. I'll give you a good example. If I was a retailer of any size, I would have and there's software out there that would allow me to take the heat signature of your phone and follow you through my store and see the path you follow, the path you take. That's invaluable data, because if I can match that up with your final destination, a purchase at a particular day, at a particular moment, then I've got gold because I know how you walked in my store. I know how you interacted with the placement of those goods. I know how long you spent. I know what appealed to you, and I could answer some questions like, when someone comes to my store, do they wander around a while and look around and then just go get what they want and go? Do they come in honestly looking and not sure, and they get guided there by somebody? And your employees, if you're Lowe's if you're Lowe's or your Home Depot and you're not using this if you're not using this technology, you're crazy. Because if you're like, if you've ever, well, let me say this: a trip to Lowe's or a trip to any of these big hardware companies, even to Ace Hardware, and I know I'm naming names, okay, or Home Depot, can be a nightmare if you're not quite sure what you're looking for. And it can be a nightmare because you go in there and you're looking, and their employee is typically talking to who? The local contractor with whom they do a lot of business. So you can see the kinds of things that we can do with the technologies that's out there, and learn about customer behavior, and now if you're like me, you may have already looked online. There's all kinds of information we can get about a prospective sale, the journey from they maybe hit my website and they were looking for wrenches or whatever, and then they showed up at my doorstep at my Lowe's, wherever in Penn, and then I track them as they go through, okay, and I can get a sense of how many minutes were they in my store before one of the associates there stopped them and said, "How can I help you?" This is incredibly important for them, because if you walk into one of those places and you walk out and you don't have the items that you wanted, you wasted some time. And, you'll find out when you go out. Many of you younger folks who are unmarried, you go out and you get married and you buy a home. Trust me, you will come to say, other than Facebook or whatever social media is, the most important app on my phone is my Home Depot or Lowe's, because you'll be doing a lot of searching. Trust me, you will. It's just fascinating stuff with what we're going to see happening in the future. What I tried to do is expand some on the text as we talked about this, and the dashboard data. And of course, then the authors walk us through some of these questions and problems. I'm going to stop for a moment because I've got a whole bunch of us here, and I want to see, is there anybody that has a question I could try to answer for you? And if you do, you may need to unmute your microphone. Anybody? Okay, we've got about 25 minutes left, and we're over at 3:15. And so I think I've hit the highlights of chapter 6 and blended in some information that's a little bit beyond what the authors of the text talk about. Maybe I think I've tried to give you some practical examples and some food for thought. Now, I did again post some additional resources, and I want to show you those. I'm going to go over here for just a minute to the web safari. Okay, this is one that I developed last year, and I've got a couple of things there about projects. I don't want you to get too worried about that. But here, and I think I showed you guys this Monday, facial recognition, wearable computers, sports and analytics, casting a laptop to your screen. Now, one of the best Christmas gifts I've ever gotten my 94-year-old mother-in-law went over to Best Buy because she knows I'm a technology type person, and she said, "Is there something you might have?" And the guy said, "Ma'am, I've got the exact thing your son-in-law will love." And she came home and she told my wife, she said, "I don't know what this thing is, this Google Chrome, but the guy at the store said that he'd like it." This is the story after I get the gift. And my wife said, "Well," and she went and she said, "He's going to love this because I can cast, I've got Google Chrome on my TV. And so I've got the app on my Chrome browser. So if I want to take YouTube or anything, I can cast it over." He said, "Oh, I've been doing that for a long time." And you'll notice some of your instructors now are using like AirPlay to screencast, to cast things. Well, what does that do? Well, let's talk about that for just a moment. What was Google doing? Google was doing something very, very smart. First of all, they were selling you a product that I think my mother-in-law said it cost her $35. Okay, no annual fees. She paid $35 flat. Okay, but embedded in that device is a sensor, I guarantee you, that's feeding data over to Google about my viewing habits. And if I'm casting my desktop or my tower screen, it's tracking that stuff. Just like my cable provider tracks every time I watch anything. They track it. Why? Because they want to keep tailoring offers to me. They want to keep me engaged, and they want to make sure that they can tailor the experience. This is also things like they have these. Cox has a thing called Contour, where now you can talk to the machine. Go, "I want to go to channel 793 or whatever." Oh, okay. Instead of me using the guide. And I'll guarantee you those guides also feed data. They've got chips in them, and they feed data back to that provider. But here, the whole idea is to take and create a unified communications and entertainment system for you. There's a reason Fox Sports gives you an app, or ESPN gives you an app where you can press it and watch a game. It's not because they love you. It's because they can tell advertisers, you can run the same ad and that viewer will see it on a phone, a laptop, a desktop, their TV. They'll potentially see it 5 times at least once. And they take their advertising and tailor such. They can also get a sense of eyeballs and what do people watch. You'll see this, you're going to see this more and more as there's this battle between these tech companies, okay? They're on one end, and the phone companies, they're in another piece of this, the cable providers, and then the other people who produce content. The companies like Sony that make movies, or distribute music or movies or TV shows. And we're just going to see this, and these types of devices that let me cast stuff from one device to the other, or link, or I use an app that's buried on every device I have, is just simply nothing more than more opportunities for that provider to sell advertising, and pardon me, to create a demand for media buys for what they offer. So whether I'm Cox, I'm Verizon, all of them, and you're just going to see that become more and more you're just going to see more and more of that type of thing in the future, because these devices now are intended to become a platform, and they're intended to become a way for, 25 years ago, if someone said you'll watch TV on your computer, I'd have said, maybe. But now my computer screen, it has HD. It's like there are times I go, I'd rather just sit here in the chair and watch football games or baseball on the computer than go sit down. And at a certain point, my wife and I love every now and then to go into Best Buy and look at TVs. Okay, I like big screen TVs. I have an unholy desire to buy one when I can do better things with my money, and it makes it's just one of those things that I think, wow, I love those huge TVs and so much that I can see. But on the other hand, okay, I look at my desktop and I go, well, I can see stuff just as the HD is just as good here as it is in there, and at times even better. So I don't know that I really need that big screen TV, especially when I can stream this stuff on my phone or tablet, on my desktop. All of you have grown up with this, and you're used to this. For those of us who didn't grow up with this, this is a whole different world. And it's going to be interesting to see how it shapes itself out. So if you're a marketer and you're trying to do media buys, the good news is you've got all these ways you can tailor media buys. The bad news is you have all these ways you can tailor media buys. And I think who knows what we'll see in the future. I'm certain that we're going to try to make these devices more and more interactive as you go along. So if you say, I'm bored with this game, take me to the whatever next game. It'll take you there instead of you fumbling around with a programming stick or a remote control device and trying to use it. And I looked the other day, I have Cox cable, and I have over 900 channels. I can save, I think it was 1,000 hours. I've been with Cox a long time. My dad was with Cox, so they give me deals. And I can store 1,000 hours of movies. That's like 40 days of movies. I'll never watch all of them. I record so much stuff, I'll never see it. So, but because I record it and I don't pay for the space, I get it from them as a freebie. They know a lot about my viewing habits. And I was shocked the other day. I had one of these shocks where I saw a product that I buy quite a bit, and it showed up as an ad on my television in one of the programs I watch a lot, and it showed up in my browser when I browse into one of my favorite websites, and I'm going, holy smokes, but that's big data and how they pull all of that information. And I'm waiting for it to show up on Facebook. When it does, I'm going to go, okay, that's a privacy issue for me as well as just marketers trying to say, hey, yeah, we know you want to use this, or we think we do. Here's an opportunity to buy it, and usually it's something with a coupon. And I'm just going to give you a very simple business example, and we're coming down to the end of this. My wife and I love Italian food. She's more of a freak about it than I am. I'm more of a Mexican food type person. She loves Italian, and I can guarantee you, and there's a nice restaurant here. They're called Oliveros, and they have an excellent menu. The food is fantastic. The service is great. But the thing that's interesting is they have fully embraced location technology. They fully embraced apps. And so every day she gets a special from them, like 10% off or 2 for 1 for this thing. And if I say to her, our conversations have now become driven by, which app on our phone gives us the best deal? Are we going to go eat with them? Are we going to go down to over to one of the Mexican food places here in town? Or where are we going to go? And we'll get out. We'll look through the deals. So I told her, I said, what we're doing is a 21st century thing of when you used to get coupons through the mail and you'd make a decision on what you're going to eat based on those coupons. The power of apps. And okay, and the cool thing is, and she loves this. I think it's fun too. My wife, again, she is the queen of discounts. I guarantee you. She loves to hold that phone up and go, now here's our thing. And the waitress is usually someone your age, maybe a little younger, will just kind of laugh at us. Like, yeah, oh no. It's like, we know about my wife's going, I got it right here in the phone. And it's interesting to see how they just kind of giggle and they look and say, there's an old guy and his wife. And yeah. So you guys live in a little bit of a different world or see things a little bit differently than I do. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I also want to make sure that you go over and take a look at these. I think Code Academy is probably one of the most interesting. Coursera is a place I inhabit a lot. And I would say this, when you get out of school, just get ready for having to go back and do some more learning. I've been doing continuing education ever since I got my doctorate, and I haven't been able to stop. And this is even when I was outside of academia, working as executive director at a couple of places, I still had to have continuing ongoing training. So I know learning is a nightmare, but I'd say go over and take a look at Coursera because there's some interesting stuff there that they're offering over there and that they're doing. So I want to encourage you to do that. Now, other than the web safari, I think I've got a TED Talk down there for you. I would like you to take a look at that. Certainly some good information. And then some information about like the NASA PRISM program, some resources for you to go and take a look at that will add to your experience. Take 10 or 15 minutes. The YouTube video, for example, you can get a transcript of it. You can read it. But I want to give you the time, say another 10 minutes or so, to go find those resources, look at them, and extend some of the learning that we did today. I'm trying to build on your textbook and then build on my lecture on the textbook and then show you some more practical examples so you get more value out of the course. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody, and I trust if you have any questions, since you didn't ask me before, you can send me an email and I'll try to answer it. And I look forward to seeing everybody on Monday.